Looking through some of our progress, I think some of us are getting a little confused on the IXL. The first thing you definitely want to make sure is you have the slides maybe open, as well as maybe having notes that you took from Wednesday's live class while you're trying to do this IXL. It'll be very, very helpful. Okay, so in every single one of the IXLs, you're going to be given a food chain of an ecosystem.
This diagram shows a food chain from a grassland ecosystem in Wyoming.
The microphones will read off segments of the question for you.
Slender wheatgrass, katydid, deer mouse, red fox.
And those two parts will be very similar. Here's a food chain in an ecosystem. Here's how you pronounce the names. The questions, though, change each round.
In this food chain, the slender wheatgrass is a producer. Why?
And because of that question, we have to figure out why the slender wheatgrass is a producer. So if you don't remember what a producer is, that's fine. Go back into your notes or reference this slide. They could be helpful. Producers make their own energy, typically from sunlight. So which of those makes the most sense? It makes its own food, it eats a consumer, it eats another organism. Our description says nothing about eating, but it does say make their own energy. And we get energy from food, so it makes its own food. Okay? And so you have to go through each of these questions to get to the next level. Different food chain in a different ecosystem, different organisms. In this food chain, the copepod is a primary consumer. Why? Well, primary consumers consume producers for energy. And when we say consume, that means eat. It eats a producer. And so you go through that for every single one of those questions. You go on and answer the rest for that stage. So now I've made it to the second stage. The questions and the ecosystems and food chains might change a little bit. This diagram shows a chain from Monterey Bay. It's an ecosystem off California. There's kelp, half moon, sea lion, and orca. The half moon is an herbivore. Why? Well, we reviewed herbivore a couple weeks ago. Herbivores only eat plants, and we know plants are producers. So it doesn't make its own food. It doesn't eat a primary consumer, because then that would make it potentially a carnivore. It eats a producer. The Arctic fox is a predator. Why? Well, we can go back to our definitions for predators. A consumer that hunts and eats other organisms for energy. We should change that actually, because it's not organisms, it's a consumer, another animal for energy. And it hunts and eats another consumer. It eats another animal. Okay. Carnivores, in this question,
The common shrew is a carnivore. Why?
You have to remember that omnivores eat both plants and meat, carnivores eat just meat or other animals, and herbivores eat just plants. And the best answer here doesn't make its own food, doesn't eat a producer that would make it an herbivore, it eats a consumer. You continue through that stage. In this stage, you are going to select organisms that fit your role. Which organism is a producer? Producers make their own energy from the sun. In this case, there's only one. Is it the wild oat, the white-tailed jackrabbit, the long-tailed weasel, the red fox, or the coyote? It is in fact the wild oat. The wild oat is a producer. It makes its energy from sunlight. Now, in this food chain, in a forest ecosystem in Virginia, we have to identify which organisms are prey? Remember, prey are consumers that are hunted and eaten by other organisms for energy. And we can be more specific because it's not just organisms, it is other consumers, because other consumers are animals, typically. Okay. So, is the crabgrass prey? No, it's not prey because in order to be prey, you must be a consumer. The crabgrass is a producer. Is the field cricket prey? Yes, the field cricket is prey because it gets hunted and eaten by the rough green snake. But in our question it says,
select each organism below that is prey in this food chain.
Each, so there can be more than one. Is the rough green snake prey? Yes, it gets hunted and eaten by the black racer. Is the black racer, a different kind of snake, a prey? Well, does it get hunted and eaten by anything? Yes, it gets hunted and eaten by the bald eagle, so the black racer is also prey. For every question you see, there's going to be a role.
Select each organism below that is a primary consumer in this food chain.
That is bolded. It is your job to identify each organism that fits that role. In stage 4, the questions have shifted a little bit. You are going to get an organism now, the slender wheatgrass in this case, and it's your job to identify, based on which organism they pick, what is its role. Well, the slender wheatgrass is at the very beginning of our food chain. Organisms that are at the beginning of your food chain are producers. Producers are never any other role. They can only be producers because they make energy from sunlight. In this case, we see the short-tailed weasel. The short-tailed weasel is right here. Now we have to ask ourselves, is it a primary consumer? What does a primary consumer do? What is its role? Well, a primary consumers consume producers for energy. Does the short-tailed weasel eat a producer? No. The bilberry is a producer. The brown lemming is not, so it cannot be a primary consumer. Is the short-tailed weasel a secondary consumer? Well, to be a secondary consumer, you eat the primary consumer for energy. The bilberry is a producer. The organism that eats it, the brown lemming, is a primary consumer, which then makes the short-tailed weasel, since it consumes the brown lemming for energy, makes it a secondary consumer. If it's a secondary consumer, it cannot be primary or tertiary. Can it be prey? In order to be prey, you have to be hunted and eaten by another organism. And it is. The parasitic Jaeger, a type of bird, hunts and eats the weasel. Is it a predator? In order to be a predator, you have to hunt and eat another organism. It does. The weasel hunts and eats the lemming. That makes it a predator. You have to continue from that stage. In this stage, you are given an organism. What are all the roles of this organism? In the final stage here, you are looking at how matter or energy from the food we eat moves in the food chain. And so you have to look at both parts. The brown lemming is eaten by the Arctic fox. So we have the brown lemming is eaten by the Arctic fox. The Arctic fox gets energy from the brown lemming. So, does matter move from a producer to a primary consumer? Nope. The producer is the lichen, and the primary consumer is the brown lemming. So it can't be the first one. Matter moves from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer? Yep. The brown lemming is a primary consumer because it hunts and eats the lichen. The Arctic fox is the secondary consumer. Matter moves from the secondary consumer to the primary consumer? That can't be right, because that would mean that the brown lemming hunts and eats the Arctic fox. That's not what this food chain shows us. Does matter move from the secondary consumer to the tertiary consumer? No, because the brown lemming's the primary, Arctic fox is the secondary. Secondary to tertiary is Arctic fox to the Baffin Island wolf. Does matter move from predator to prey? Yes. The brown lemming is prey to the predator, Arctic fox. That one is also true. And so you do that continuing through stage 5. You are given 2 organisms. How does the matter move? And you have to decide, does that statement make sense? Does one of these statements make sense? You can have more than one correct answer. We can do one more together. How does matter move when the sunflower star is eaten by the sea otter? Well, let's identify their roles to start. Kelp is the producer. Norris top snail is the primary or first consumer. Rainbow star is the secondary or second level consumer. The sunflower star is the tertiary or third level consumer. And the sea otter is the top predator, top consumer. It is the apex predator. There's nothing that hunts and eats the sea otter. So, does matter move from the secondary consumer to tertiary? Nope, that would be rainbow star to sunflower star. That is not what we see in our question. Does it move from tertiary consumer to the top consumer? Yes. Sunflower star is the tertiary consumer. Sea otter is the top apex predator consumer. Matter move from the top consumer to the tertiary consumer? Nope, because then that would mean the sunflower star hunts and eats the sea otter. Doesn't make sense. Does matter move from prey to predator? Is the sunflower star prey to the sea otter? Predator? Yes. That means it cannot be from predator to prey. This one is never true. You complete the last on your own.